She lived a full life and broke every expectation they had for someone with Down syndrome. And then the world went silent when she developed dementia. Jenny Clark didn't expect to become the one fighting for her sister's care. But when the system didn't know what to do with young onset dementia and Down syndrome, she stepped in. This is a story of love, loss, and relentless advocacy. If you are caring for someone else, whether paid or unpaid, and no matter how many hours you do it, did you realise that you may be missing out on thousands of pounds of discounts for things that you may use every day? The Able to Care podcast is proud to be sponsored by the UK's #1 carers card. Started by two best friends who recognise that carers deserve better and are 100% committed to helping to change the lives of all carers and bringing them together as a strong community. Carers Card UK provides support, recognition and rewards. It offers reassurance by providing an ID card that helps access emergency information when needed, while also unlocking discounts, a wellbeing hub, a carers circle tool and a community through their app. All of this for less than the price of a box of chocolates a year. There are discounts on gym membership, days out, electrical goods, clothing and even glasses. Let others know you care while taking a little care of yourself with an ID card you can be proud of. Visit carerscarduk.co.uk/promo code/able to care today to order yours. Hello and welcome back to the Able to Care podcast. I'm your host, Andy Baker, and today's episode is a deeply personal one. It's about what happens when someone you love begins to disappear and you realise the system built to support them isn't built at all. My guest, Jenny Clark, a sharp, accomplished business consultant by day and a fierce, loving sister and advocate by every other measure. Jenny's sister Liz is someone who has defied expectations all her life. Living with Down syndrome never held her back. But as she developed young onset dementia, the path forward became unclear, unsupported, and painfully lonely. In this episode, Jenny shares what it's really like to try and navigate the care system when your loved one doesn't fit the boxes on the form. We talk about identity, grief, joy, and injustice, and the quiet strength of sibling love. Whether you're a family member, professional, or just someone who cares about inclusion, you need to hear this. So, Jenny, thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you here. Yeah,
Good.
It's really good to have a chat with you again. So I'm going to jump straight into it, if that's okay. So let's start with your sister. What was she like before dementia entered the picture?
Liz has defied, as you said in your introduction, defied all kind of expectations. When she was born back in 1967, the prognosis and life expectancy was not good. And my parents were told to put her in an institution and forget about her, that she wouldn't live beyond her mid-20s and that she would achieve nothing in life. And my parents didn't put her away. She lived at home and she astounded everybody. She went to school, she learned to read and write. She became an avid reader of Inside Soap. She could do maths. She just lived life to the full. And I think, that to me, that whole living life to the full was really, it exemplifies all that she's done. From leisure interests, gliding, canoeing, sailing. She absolutely loved she's a very social animal. Any excuse for a meal out, or a gathering or a disco. So a very energetic and happy person who really did defy everything that my parents had been told. She lived at home until 2003 and at that point moved to live in her own house with a couple of hours care a day from MenCat just to really make sure she was eating an evening meal and that things were okay. And she managed to do that for about 12 years. And none of that was on the agenda when she was born. People didn't expect that to happen. And I think that's a good example of how the right care in the right place at the right time really can, give people the opportunities that they crave. And there's lots in the media at the moment. The Down Syndrome Act has been published. The guidelines that go with it still are sat in government and haven't come out. But lots about getting people into work. If you want to do that, you have to provide the support. And I think that was one of the great disappointments for Liz. She would have loved a job, but nobody wants to offer people with Downs a job. And she did lots of work for the charities that the daycare charities that supported her. She loved typing up minutes and doing office work, but she would have really loved a job. And I suppose that's the only disappointment, really. But in 2012, she started to exhibit some signs which we thought possibly were dementia. It was a bit of a shock to me, but it turned out to be acute depression. And the living on her own had allowed her to really enter her own little world. When she was born, she was given the label of Down syndrome, and that was enough. My parents were very much, well, that's what she's got. It was only really when she lived on her own and had care from MenCap that we started to realise, and they started to talk about her Asperger's. And I started reading up and realised that a lot of the behaviours that we'd associated with her Downs and labelled as Downs actually were tendencies to more of Asperger's. And people with Asperger's who suffer catastrophic loss can create environments where they gain back the control. So her relationship with her boyfriend, which had gone on for quite some years, was very suddenly broken up by his mother. And Liz lost control. And her way of regaining control was to invent a family. And what we discovered was that she was doing her day, so getting up, going to the day centre, coming home, having tea. And then once the carer had left, she then ran the whole day again for her family. So she was going to bed at like 3 a.m. because she'd got the family up and she'd got them off and the dog had been walked and all sorts of things. So it became very, very complex, and her safety was at risk because she was out pounding the streets, taking the kids to school and taking the dog for a walk. And she ended up being sectioned, which was a really difficult decision. I had in the background my mother's kind of how horrified she would be if she'd known this was happening. But it was the right thing for Liz. And she went into an amazing facility in York called Oak Rise, which sadly has been closed down, but it was the most amazing psych unit for people with learning disabilities. And she spent 3 months there under the care of Dr. David Milne, an amazing man. And we went to meeting after meeting. She knew she was entitled to ask to be let off section. So every however many weeks we had a meeting, and her solicitor turned up and she was kept there. And we had meetings where David would say, where's Michael? Michael was the imaginary partner. Is he with us today? Oh, yes, he's in the session. Right. Where is he? Well, he's sat behind you taking notes so we can listen to them. We can look at them later, I mean, David said he'd never met anyone like her and he would never meet anyone like her again. We came out of there with a diagnosis of acute depression, and it was obvious she couldn't go back to living on her own. And we needed to find somewhere where she could move into supported living. My mother by that stage was too old and infirm to be able to have Liz back home again. And you're told, there's a place in Northallerton for her. And you go and you take her and you show it. And she was silent nearly all the way home and then burst into tears and said, I really want to live there. Oh. Then you find out that actually there's 4 or 5 people after that place, but nobody's told you that. And you think, oh my goodness me. But eventually she did move into that house and had another amazing stage of her life. So she'd had the kind of growing up being amazing, living in her own home, fantastic. And then she moved into the supported living house in Northallerton, where she'd not lived before.
Yeah.
And she blossomed. She loved the life there. She had a degree of freedom. She was able to walk into the town. She could go for coffee and cake at Costa. She joined Zumba. She went swimming. And then COVID hit. And of course, you know, we all know how COVID affected us. But for us, suddenly we couldn't visit her. All we could do was see her as we're seeing each other, you know, on a screen. For short, sharp bursts. It wasn't like we would go and sit in the garden or take her out. And COVID, I think, masked some of the deterioration. We came out of COVID, and I think all of us came out, you know, life was a bit different. But Liz suddenly didn't really want to go to social occasions. And if she did go to Gateway Club, she wanted to go back home. And it was kind of, well, she's lost that because of COVID. But actually, had we known, it's one of the signs that somebody is developing dementia, with somebody with Downs. Yeah. Had we known, we could have planned a bit more. But we sat in blissful ignorance of the startling statistic that says that 1 in 2 with Downs over the age of 50 will have or be progressing into dementia. 1 in 2. You know, it's scary. It is seriously scary. Maybe we should have known, but, you know, we kind of... We've never really engaged with the Down Syndrome Association. My parents were very much of it. We don't need to do that. Everything's fine. I haven't read up on Downs because she's my sister, you know. But 1 in 2 will develop dementia. And, you know, there are a number of key signs. Becoming sad or fearful. Yeah, we could see that in Liz. A decline in ability to engage, and a lack of attention. Yeah. Decreased enthusiasm for activities that they've loved before. Changes in coordination and walking. So there's a whole load of signs. There's about 7 signs. And actually, with hindsight, when we've ticked it, we've gone tick, tick, tick. Should her care team have recognised those signs? I think, yes, they should. And that's not a criticism of them. It's a criticism of the care system. Because I don't think care organisations have really got that 1 in 2. You know, if you've got 4 people in a house with Downs who are in their 30s and 40s, 2 of them potentially, if not all 4, are heading towards dementia. And that brings me to health checks. People with Downs should be getting regular health checks. And there's quite a lot of research and statement about what they should receive. My sister's health checks were around, oh yes, you still weigh whatever, you're still 4'11", and your blood pressure is whatever. And I've spoken to my GP about Downs and dementia, and she had no idea of 1 in 2. She had no idea of health checks. So if our primary care teams aren't doing the checks that are needed, those checks done through the 20s, 30s and 40s provide a marker. This is where they are. Oh, they're a bit away from that. Last time you came, last year, that was okay. But and you start to track little signs of deterioration and you track them early. What we ended up with was a crisis. And we had to react, not be proactive. So in 2022, Liz had developed positional hypertension, and it meant that when she was having a bath, she was likely to crash as she stood up. The bathroom at the care home was entirely unsuitable for her needs as they were developing, and it needed to be converted to a wet room. If I say that the bathroom suite was pale pink, it kind of puts it at an age. The people who provide the care home or the rented accommodation, they didn't want to make the change. We applied for a disabled living grant. Well, you won't even get your form looked at for 9 months. And in the end, we paid for the bathroom to be converted so that it was right. That involved moving everybody from the house out to a holiday house where they went for 2 weeks while the work was done and had the most amazing holiday. But Liz couldn't cope, and she spent the whole time laid on the sofa, under a blanket, not eating, not drinking. Needless to say, she ended up very dehydrated and in hospital. And that was really when we kind of went, this is not right. She moved back to the house when they all moved back and said, "Why am I here? I don't live here. What am I doing here?" And she had completely lost the years of living at that house. And she could imagine that she lived in a bungalow in Easingwold, the town we grew up in. She could tell you where it was. I could visualise it. She'd never lived there, not in that bungalow, but that was where she was going. So she spent the next weeks escaping continually. And there was one carer for 4 people. And with hindsight, we should have said to social services who were aware of the issue, should have put more care in, because the poor carer was left going, do I stay with the 3 or do I go after the 1? The other 3 became extremely distressed by Lizzie's behaviours. And, we have to think about the impact when people are in shared facilities like that. How do they impact on the others? So one went back home, and the other 2, who were a boyfriend and girlfriend, went to the girlfriend's brother's and stayed there. And we lurched from session to session with the psych team. And I have to say that the community learning disability psych team were absolutely astounding. Amazing input from them. We couldn't have got through it without them. But eventually in February 23, we got the diagnosis of dementia, that it was Alzheimer's, which is what Downs people tend to get, Alzheimer's. Diagnosis is really difficult because with my mother's diagnosis of dementia, who's the president of America? Can you tell me what time that clock says? We did there were all sorts of kind of softer tests, but it is more difficult with somebody with a learning disability. I laughed when we had a session at the house, and the psychiatrist said, "So Liz, where do you live?" And she said, "I live here." Which, right. Fairly sudden. Yeah, but where do you live? And she banged the table and said, "I live here." And I thought, and I said, "If I need to send you a postcard from holiday, what address do I need to put on?" And she quoted the address straight away.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was kind of Liz. The spark was still there, even though we were heading to a difficult time. And we sat in meetings where the psych team said she needs to be in a place of safety. And the social worker said, there is nowhere.
Right.
She needs to be in a place of safety. There is nowhere. And it continued with this until, by chance, somebody asked a care home, could you take somebody who's got Downs and dementia? Oh, yeah. And that was a Monday afternoon, and she moved in there on the Wednesday morning. And it was just like, bang, gone. We didn't get a chance to see it. Had I done so, she wouldn't have been going there. Mm-hmm. The care worker that took her cried at what we were putting her into. Right. And she ended up spending just over, she went in the April, and by the following April, we were making representation to have her moved. She'd had some cognitive stimulation. There was an activities coordinator who kind of took Liz under her wing and said things like, let's go and do the library trolley, let's do this, let's do that. She left at the Christmas, and we moved to activities that were things like music therapy in the residents' rooms. That meant turn the radio on in their room and shut the door.
Oh dear.
So it's a bit like taking a drowning person and starving them of more oxygen.
Yeah.
So for those with Downs, dementia goes on a really rapid journey. It's like dementia on steroids.
Mm.
So you need to keep their cognitive abilities going as long as you possibly can and provide them with the stimulation that they need. And she didn't get that. And there were a lot of other issues with the care home, which resulted in us complaining to the CQC on a number of occasions. Lots of comments. It's we can't cope with her Downs, her learning disability, but the behaviours she was exhibiting were absolutely classic dementia behaviours.
Yeah.
When you start to dig into how much training they've had in dementia, 2 hours online.
Mm-hmm.
Right, okay. Liz was becoming increasingly deaf because she'd got wax in her ears.
Right.
The care home did nothing about that, even though we kept saying, can you arrange something? And in the end, my husband arranged for somebody to go in. We laughed. The guy that he found was called Fernando. Well, he was a great hit with my sister because she thought he was from ABBA. Oh,
that's what first thing I thought of as well as she said that.
You've got to laugh. You just think, how on earth are we going to get her to because she was fairly difficult to deal with. How are we going to? Oh, he's called Fernando. And the music was put on, her ears were syringed and she could hear again. But for somebody with Downs, with losing the sense of hearing, and being in a care home where a lot of the carers, English wasn't their first language.
Yep. So
she couldn't hear them. She couldn't understand them. So the world just crashed in on her. And we finally said, we need to get her moved, and we absolutely need to get her moved. And we had power of attorney, so we asked for her to be moved. Social care put in extra one-to-one sessions to see if that would help, but it didn't. And finally we said, no, she must be moved. And that was in August 23. And it took us till May 24 to get her moved. Why did it take so long? Because provision for people with Downs and dementia is just about non-existent. She's classed as having young onset dementia because she's under 65. So if you take 100 care homes, maybe 40 of them take under 65s. Out of them, maybe 20 take dementia. And out of them, none take learning disability and dementia. So our social worker, who has been amazing, and we've been very lucky that Liz has had the same social worker for about 10 years. So she knew Liz, she knew us. And I'll come back to social work in a minute. But Jenny looked at over 70 care homes, 70, before we found somewhere. She's the wrong mix. We don't do learning disability. We haven't any vacancies. We'll come back to you, but they don't. We rejected some. Oh, yes, we've got beds. Look at the CQC rating, requires improvement. You read Dad gets a good meal if the chef's on duty, but he doesn't like the sandwiches he usually gets. And you just think, no, I'm not. We found one place that could take her, but would not be able to handle her if she became less mobile, because they only had an upstairs room and all the facilities were upstairs. And my comment to the social worker at that time was, I'm not going through this again in a year's time. Potentially we knew she was going to deteriorate. And eventually, a really good friend of mine who's been a campaigner for the deaf, because she has a son who's profoundly deaf, said, who are you complaining to? And I think that brought it home. There is nobody to complain to. It's nobody's not doing a good job. Our social worker was doing a brilliant job. The CLDT team were doing a brilliant job. The bottom line is there is no care provision for people like Liz, or there is next to no care provision. And I contribute to a Facebook group which is about Downs and dementia. And you see this, somebody in Cornwall, somebody in London, somebody in Herefordshire, somebody in Staffordshire. It doesn't matter where you go, provision is sparse and virtually non-existent. I think one of the problems we have is that where in the past people like Liz would have had a dedicated social worker, and as I say, she did, or she does, a lot of that social care has gone. So if everything's okay, you don't need a social worker. It's only when there's a crisis, we go to the pool of social workers and say, oh, we've got somebody who's got a crisis. We need somebody to pick them up. They don't know them. They don't know their history. They don't know their background. They may or may not have a specialism in learning disability, but they're then faced with an approved providers list. The team who do the commissioning say, these are the places that have got homes. I suspect it's very much sorted on price. Right, there's a home in Scarborough. Fred lives in Leeds at the moment, and he'd like to keep in contact with his elderly parents, but he'll have to go to Scarborough because that's where there's a home. And I may be doing people a disservice, but from where I'm sitting, it kind of feels like that's the way it is. And we live in York, and we were offered homes in well up into Newcastle, and going down south to Doncaster, across to Skipton and Keighley. Keeping contact with your loved one is so important for them and for you. And if somebody's had a child with Downs live at home with them for 50 years, and they're ageing parents, they may not be able to drive. If you take that person out of their care for the right reasons, we need to think more about the impact it has on those around. And I know from my family just how much this has impacted on us. I'm self-employed. I've had to give up work to deal with meetings, to go to hospital visits. I'm very lucky that my husband doesn't work full time, and he's been able to provide the care that my mother, who had dementia, has needed, his father, who had dementia, has needed, and Liz. So in May 2024, she moved to a facility just outside of York called Lavender Fields. And it's a care village, so it has bungalows for people who maybe have a slight mobility issue, or one of the partners has an issue, with the aim that there's a central hub that they can access. Mm-hmm. And the central hub has 3 care wings, one of which is for young onset. And we were very taken with the concept, and we were very impressed with the way in which they engaged with us to really get to know Liz before she moved there. They wanted to be certain that they hadn't experience of Downs and dementia, but they wanted to be certain that they could take her. So she moved there on the 14th of May, walked in, very impressed. Oh, there's a coffee shop. Oh, there's a pub. Can I go to the pub? Yeah. Said hello to everybody. There was a team of visitors from the ICB. Yeah. They were just being shown round. So she immediately did meeting and greeting with them. Hello, I'm Liz. Who are you? Shook some of them by the hand. It was interesting. She mainly picked the men. She spotted Anthony, who's one of the directors of the place. Oh, hello, how are you? Shook him by the hand. We took her into the young onset wing. She saw her bedroom, and it was like listening to my mother. Oh, this is posh. And she settled in, and we left seeing her sat with a mug of hot chocolate with lots of marshmallows on the top, a plate full of food. She was tucking into it. The staff were amazing. And it was like, we've got her to the right place.
Yeah.
And everybody who has a child or a sibling with Downs who develops dementia should be entitled to have that feeling. It took a long time to get to it, but we got there. As I said, the deterioration with Downs is frighteningly quick.
Yeah.
Liz is now doubly incontinent. She is unable to weight bear. So she's in a wheelchair. She needs to be hoisted into bed, out of bed, into the shower, into a wheelchair. She developed epilepsy, which is another statistic that we didn't know about, but boys, we found out about it. Most who develop dementia will develop what's called LOMEDS, late onset myoclonic epilepsy in Downs.
Right.
Probably 2 years after the diagnosis of dementia, and Liz was almost to the calendar. The epilepsy hits her hard each time she has a seizure. She has big seizures where we end up with, they end up having to call the paramedics. She has myoclonic, so she has tonically where she shakes, and she has periods of absence. The care home just deal with it.
Yeah.
I don't get a call to say there's a problem. I get a call to say, oh, she had a seizure this morning, but she's fine. She's sleeping it off and everything's okay. And they have just handled the deterioration so well and so competently and so confidently. But she doesn't recognise us anymore. So we go to see her, and we sit in the coffee shop and we drink a coffee and we try and get her to have a hot chocolate. And this weekend, she was asleep most of the time. But just every now and again, her eyes open up and we go, oh, you're back. And if you say to her, how are you? I'm doing good. And then we drift off to sleep again. And she's definitely on the way out. Am I sad about it? I'm sad that she had to have the experience of the poor care home. Lavender Fields wasn't open at the point we had to move her. It's very new. I dread to think what my mother would have made of that care home. And all the time she was in it, I was thinking, my parents left me in charge of her well-being. What the hell am I doing? But your hands are tied because the system doesn't allow you to find the resources you need, the care you need. But she's happy. She's getting fed. She's got a lovely room. She can look out into the garden. The staff will take her out for walks. She's not able to really engage with the young onset activities as much. But the other day they had a singer in, and as soon as they put Sweet Caroline on, she was singing. And, it's that whole engagement. But caring for people with young onset is so different to people who are in the 70s and 80s, asking somebody who's in their 50s to sit in a lounge and watch Vera Lynn, or some old film, or just sit there and because it's so hot you go to sleep. The care activities that Liz has had access to, they've gone to the Thor Gardens in York and then gone to the city screen afterwards for a drink. She had a spritzer and knocked it back and said it's fun, thank you and bottoms up. They've gone to petting, those sort of farm parks where there's animals. She's cuddled rabbits. They have things come to the care homes. So they've had alpacas. They have a pony that comes regularly and walks around the care home. Inside, Liz was in bed, so they took the pony into a bedroom for her to see it. You know, she's getting stimulation, and if she'd gone there when she first developed the dementia, she wouldn't be. I'm convinced she wouldn't be where she is now, in terms of the deterioration. But what will be will be. I just want to make sure that nobody else, or that hopefully nobody else, has to go through what we've had to go through, and nobody else has to go through what Liz has gone through. And I think that, there are a number of failings. If I look back, I don't think her care team in the supported living house had the right training for them to be able to identify those signs. And I think they became very protective of my sister. They wanted to do the love and care for her, but they weren't, the placement was wrong. And actually, you almost do them a disservice by trying to get and not saying we need to do something different. I think for many people, social workers only get involved at the point of crisis. We were lucky that wasn't our case. I think there's a lack of robust health checking. So as a result, crisis happens. Whereas, if you could see the deterioration, you'd be able to say, Johnny's slipping, and we need to think in a couple of years' time, if this continues, he's going to need to be in a different place. Let's plan it. I think there's a real lack of understanding of the statistics and the 1 in 2 over 50 in primary care. And I think there could be a lot more done in GPs to actually call people in and do those robust health checks and really involve the people that see them in the daycare centre, involve the parents, involve the support, the care teams, so that there's a picture of that person. I think the housing stock that many people are placed in, very nice when you're in your 20s and 30s to live in a nice detached 4-bedroom family home. When you can't manage the stairs very well, what do you do then? When the bathrooms for my sister isn't suitable, what do you do then? And I know I've spoken to the provider that did my sister's house, and they are aware and are looking at buying different housing stock, but there's lots of houses out there that have got people in. And I think, there needs to be much more proactive action. We need to be thinking about looking ahead. I think placing people in the wrong place can have a really devastating impact. And, that was the only place. And yes, she was safe there, although she did escape on a number of occasions. I mean, I think it's hilarious that she's put there to be safe. And they didn't clock that she's sitting in reception with a coat on, with a rucksack on, with all the CDs in, just waiting for somebody to hold the front door open. Bye, Mabel. See you next week. Pachung, gone.
Yeah.
And once she was out, she wasn't coming back. And the number of times my husband had to drive for an hour to go to find her and try and work her back into the home. So, it wasn't the right place, but it was the only place. And nobody should be in that. We should have choice.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of, it's about person-centered care.
Yeah.
Right from the get-go. We talk about it. We're really good about talking about person-centered care, aren't we? It's one of those, it's really person-centered. But for Liz, my experience was she was shoeboxed, right? She's got dementia. She's got a learning disability. Shove her off somewhere. And it almost felt like people were writing off her life.
Yeah.
And she had the right, she's got the right to live her life. I really hope that the government will pull a finger out and get the notes, the guidelines for the Down Syndrome Act out. There's a suggestion that it may become a bit watered down and they might try and bring other learning disabilities into it. It's an act that Liam Fox put in specifically about Downs, and it needs to stay specifically about Downs. But the guidelines were written about 3 years ago. Why aren't they there? The act in itself is useless without the guidance notes. I met with my sister's MP, Sir David Davis, in November last year. He came to see her at the care home. And he raised in Parliament when, with a written question, when are they coming out? Stephen Kinnock said that they would be out early in the new year. Didn't appear. Asked the same question again, and I think March, they'll be out in the early summer. They're not out. Right. Parliament's now in recess. Nothing's going to happen until September.
Yeah.
How long have we got to wait to have the guidance that will start to put some of the things in place that are so desperately needed? People with Downs are living longer. Yeah. When my sister was born, she'll live into her 20s, not beyond. They're now living into their 50s, 60s, 70s. So they're going to be there needing care and support. And we've got a social care system which is broken anyway, but it's especially broken for people like my sister. And I think, there needs to be some urgent change. I guess my greatest sadness is that there are so few people being placed in the young onset wing at Lavender Fields.
Right.
That they're not going to keep it open. They're mothballing it.
Right.
Right. I cannot believe that there aren't 30 or 40 people in Humber, North Yorkshire, York, South Yorkshire, who wouldn't be able to make the best use and have the best life there. But it's really easy to pick somewhere that's cheap or quick or on your list. My sister will stay there. She will remain there. But, you have to ask what's going on where there's such a fantastic provision and people aren't being fed that way. And I suspect that a large part of it comes down to funding. Because my sister was sectioned, her funding is slightly different. But if you're somebody with young onset and you're the breadwinner, and you're in your 50s and you've got a house with a mortgage and a wife and children that are at school, you can't sell your house to go and pay for your care. If you're in your 80s and it's you and Joe, well, we can sell the house and we can move into a care home. And when the funds run down, somebody will step in. We don't look at young onset correctly. We don't recognise the devastation it has on their families. And I've kind of been banging a drum about young onset. My focus is very much now on young onset, the Downs and young onset, because I feel it's too big a battle to take young onset as a battle. But there was a very interesting discussion in Parliament led by Graham Stewart, who's the MP for Beverley and Holderness, about Downs. And I was recently passed the Hansard for that. It took place in March. And there's such passion for creating change. And so many MPs took part in the debate and discussion. And it's opened up a whole new address book, and I'm busy writing, but we've got to make change because there are too many people the system is failing. And unfortunately, people with Downs, not all of them have a bossy big sister who can battle for them. if it had been my parents, if my parents were still alive and they were having to do it, they wouldn't have had a clue where to start. What would they have done? We closed down the big institutions, and care in the community was a big thing. But all those people who we moved out of the institutions where they had a kind of safety net, we moved them into the community. They're now starting to be of an age where they actually need to be brought back out of the community because they can't cope. But those institutions which would have cared for them cradle to grave aren't there. And, we lived in a town with an asylum or a hospital, a mental hospital. And there were things that were wrong about them, and care in the community was good for some. But it was kind of like, right, let's move everybody out into the community, sell off the site. We can make lots of money out of selling off the site. Somebody will build some houses on it, without thinking about, and what are we going to do in 20 years' time or in 30 years' time? And I think there was a degree of short-sightedness. And whatever was the plan was then, I don't think is still there.
Yeah.
And I think that, shutting units like Oak Rise, that provided that specialist site care, there wasn't anywhere like that for my sister to go. It's not there. That would have been a place of safety that she would have bought us a bit of time, because they could have actually looked at the dementia and kind of worked out where we were going. But it's not there. And that leaves you in the position that it left us. So, it's been a tough time really since COVID, and especially tough as we came out of COVID and realised that we'd got the issues we'd got to deal with. So there you have it.
Well, that's an incredible story as far as Liz's journey is concerned, and there's so much to kind of pick out in that. It sounds like there's an element of, you've spoken an awful lot of easy in hindsight kind of talk as well, whether it be from the very early stages of Liz's life of not recognizing some of her additional mental health difficulties or neurological differences and stuff like that. A lot of assumptions, which sound like, I think we're all, the label comes and that's kind of where we stop. But I think that's also where the professionals kind of sometimes work as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it was interesting when we were under the psych in York, when Liz was still living in the house on her own. And we'd had this suggestion of Asperger's, and I'm a great one for getting, right, I need to read about that, I need to understand. And I was travelling, I can remember vividly, I was travelling back from running some training in Aberdeen, and I was coming into Edinburgh, and I'd read a section in this book about Asperger's and this catastrophic loss. And how they build they can build imaginary people who then they can control, so they're regaining that control.
Yeah.
And I can remember ringing the psychiatrist and saying, have you got whatever the book was? And she said, yeah. I said, look at page 42, the bottom of it, or whatever page it was. And she went, yeah, right. Yeah, that's the exact. And, that to me was all sorts of behaviours then made sense. My sister was obsessed with time.
Yeah.
So my grandmother had a mantle clock that only told the right time on a Wednesday. It kind of she wound it up on a Sunday, and it gained, and then it was right on Wednesday, and then it lost towards the end of the week. My grandmother was brilliant at working out, it's Monday, it's saying 1:10, so it's actually probably only 1:00, and whatever. But my sister would walk into Nana's lounge and go, that clock's wrong.
Yeah.
And she had a digital watch. And when the hour changed, she would pass it to my father and say, change it, needs changing. And he would change it. And then she'd come back and say, it's still wrong. And it would be like a second out. She'd have listened to the pips. And it would be maybe 10 seconds out. But it had to be absolutely, it took my father he dreaded the days that the hour changed because it would take him 2 or 3 hours to get it to exactly the point that she said, yeah, thanks, it's okay. And we soon moved her to an analog watch because it was a damn sight easier because her eyesight's not brilliant. So it was a bit, small face, she can't see it. But it did make a lot of sense of a lot of her behaviours. But, my parents didn't have experience of other kids with Down, so it was just Liz, And my mum didn't, it was bad enough her having a label of Downs. Mum didn't want having any other labels. But I think with hindsight, it would have helped us understand some of her behaviours, only to give us insight, not to do anything. But I think there is a degree of with hindsight. I know when my mother said, "Well, I'm too old now to be responsible for Liz. I'm handing her over to you." And I remember vividly when I think Liz had just come home from the maternity hospital, my father taking me for a walk, and I can visualise the walk now. And he went through the litany of the things she would never do. And at the end of it, he said, "And your mother and I know that you will always look after her." And that's, that again is another thing that you see people who've got a child with Downs. And one of my messages is don't ever put that responsibility on their siblings. If they want to take that responsibility, then let them. But I sat with that on my shoulder, and I've sat throughout my life with, you will be responsible. I'm very lucky my husband worships Liz. He's known her for 40 years, so he's known her, a long, long time. And if I wasn't here, he would be right there caring for her. We both have power of attorney, as does our daughter. But it's a heavy responsibility, particularly when things go wrong. And when they go wrong, they go badly wrong. It's been hard. It's been hard, I think, particularly for our daughter, who at times has had to be put to second place because we're having to deal with Liz. And we can't do something because we've got to deal with Liz. And that's been hard for her. And I have to say, she's grown up with a very loving aunt. And the two of them together, when Ellie was about 3 and Liz was on fine form, we've had some very entertaining times together. And those are the memories that you hold dear. I mean, our daughter finds it very hard. She's down in Chichester now. And she finds it very hard because she's not able to see Liz regularly. So when she sees her, she saw her at Christmas, and the change between August when she'd last seen her and Christmas was so marked. We tried to, we have a WhatsApp group and circulate photographs. The care home are brilliant at sharing stuff with us, which helps Ellie keep in touch. But I feel very, very wary about having put her on the power of attorney because, if something was to happen to Bernard and I, then it becomes my 23-year-old's daughter's responsibility. But we've done it, and we've done it to the best of our abilities. I just wish I'd seen the awful care home before she moved in, because I wouldn't have let her go there. And, when you walk out in tears, it's hard.
100%. There was something that resonated that with me, because you sort of said that a lot of the staff were, very caring. They wanted to do best by this, but they just didn't have the knowledge, the understanding. They hadn't had the training. The facilities weren't right and things like that. And it feels an element, as you said, it wasn't the right placement for Liz. But I should imagine there were some of the staff that were probably quite affected by that, wanted to do good, but just couldn't. And that's where the system's letting them down again a little bit, isn't it?
Not I think definitely the supported living, I would go with that. The staff at the care home, I I would question that. There was lots of, there was a barcode just through the door that they scanned to say that they'd checked the room. So if you've checked the room, how come when I turn the duvet over, there's feces on the sheets? If you've checked the room, how come the toilet's blocked? Again. If you've checked the room, how come the window won't shut because the frame's rotten? There were some safeguarding issues there, but it was a struggle for them. They, and I fully appreciate they didn't understand. Most of the people there that had dementia were very elderly, and it was a case of sit in your chair, Doris, and they will put the telly on. And if you've got somebody who's in their 50s who's ambulatory and quite capable of running and jumping and climbing and everything else. She worked out really quickly the first day my husband went to visit her. She said, "Oh, there's a keypad on that door, Bernard, and if you press the numbers, you can open the door. Do you know what the numbers are?" And Bernard said, "No." Down the corridor, there's another door, and it's got a push bar. And that'll open it, won't it? And Bernard said, "Yeah, but there'll be a really loud alarm go off, and she doesn't like loud alarms." Oh. She worked out that when the laundry came, it came in a big basket. Could get in that basket. Really? I think what the care home couldn't get was she might have dementia, but actually she's bright enough to be able to work out an escape route.
It sounds like the Great Escape.
And she was detained there under a dolls. I mean, it was hilarious, when she did get out, because she was like, "I'm free." We took her to get her eyes checked, and there was somebody from the care home was supposed to come with us, and they just said, "No, you'll have to take her on your own." And we went, and she spent the whole time. We parked as near to the opticians as we could, so it was like Frog Marcher. "It's really uneven here, Liz. Hold on to me because it's got cobbles. Hold on to Bernard on the other side." And she was almost sort of walked in, and all the time she was there, she was planning her escape. And she said to Bernard at the end of it, "You can go now. I'm going to walk back." We were about 20 miles away from the care home, and Bernard said, "Oh, it's an awful long way. Would you like me to give you a lift?" "Oh, thank you. That'll be fine." Yeah. We got her back in the car, shut the door and locked it. And Bernard said, "Thank God we've got her back in," because I honestly thought we were going to be stuck. Yeah. And, some of those things, you come away laughing, but you come away thinking, thank God. And we actually parked right by the door and kind of opened the door, told the care home, "Get the door open." She's going to be coming in, and before she's in, she'll be in before she's realised what's happened. And you have a chuckle about them, but at the end of the day, it's the care provision needs to be so much better for people like Liz. And dementia takes everybody in different ways. My mum was very compliant. Bernard's dad was an absolute, he was completely uncompliant. People with Downs might become very sleepy and sit on the sofa, and that's fine. Peter just sleeps all the time, or Joe just sleeps all the time, or Liz was very active. Yeah. And, this is where it needs to be this person-centred focus to really make sure that you look at what are the issues here that are presenting now. Where do we think these issues are going to lead us, and by when, to make sure that the care provision is right. It was interesting that the team from Lavender Fields and Leanne, their manager, said that she thought that because the care they would provide was so different, Liz would not want to escape. And that was the case. So It was very interesting, and on a number of occasions, my husband and I both said, if we were in here, we'd be wanting to escape. Yeah. And our daughter's ultimate threat is, if you two don't watch it, come the glorious day, you'll be off there. And
Sounds like that's not really a threat, though. You're quite happy with that.
It's the ultimate threat. But it was true that actually she didn't want to escape because she was given the cognitive stimulation. Oh, we're all going into the other wing because we've got somebody in with a banjo, or we've got a band, or we're going outside, we're going to have ice creams. We're doing so. Even when she could go out into the village area, she'd no wish to leave the village. She could walk to go and look at the cows in the field by the bungalows, and would happily walk back. More than happy to sit in the big open lounge reception area and have a coffee. The door was just on a disabled button push, never made any attempt because what she was getting met her needs. And, even now, although she's in a much poorer state, and, the move to a wheelchair was quite rapid. She'd had a number of infections. And again, people with Downs, really quite prone to infections, prone to sepsis. And my mother's view was every year she needs a damn good dose of antibiotics and it'll clear everything out. And it actually, she ended up with a really long recurrent urinary tract infection just after she'd moved in, and we think it was underlying. But she started grounding, and eventually she just would not walk and could not walk. And, she's in a wheelchair now, which is actually great because we can whiz her around anywhere. If it's in the hot summer days, we've sat outside with her, and try to provide the stimulation. She's very keen on, or she likes touch. So just stroking her forehead now, stroking her hand, stroking her cheek, clearly soothes her. The home have bought her a trouble muncher, which is a kid's toy. It's like it's a bit like a sort of stuffed doll, not a fabric, and it has a rucksack on the back. And the idea is that a child can write their troubles on it, put it in the rucksack, and then either the teacher or the parent can extract them. But Liz holds this. She doesn't do any of that with it, but she holds him very close to her. And when she's kind of conscious, she will talk very quietly to him. And a lot of it's, you're okay, you're safe. And the fact that she keeps saying, you're safe, I think has a lot to do with the previous place she was. And she's feeling that she's safe. But he pretty well goes everywhere with her. And he's clearly providing her with a great deal of comfort. And I think, again, that's that insight that the current care home have had. This is something that will work for her. She's got, in her room, they've got light stimulation for her. If she's having what we call a duvet day, they will have music playing that's stuff that she likes, that she can, if she wants to sing to. They'll put ABBA on the television. She's very into her ABBA. So there's even if she's in her room, they're working all the time on that stimulation to kind of keep her, and they're so focused on making sure she eats and drinks. I don't think the previous place would have had a clue how much fluid she'd taken in during the day. There, it's like she's had 40 millilitres now. Right, put it into the system. So yeah, it's been a tough journey, but I just hope that others don't have to. That the system can change to stop others having to go through the same thing. I think we're a long way off that. I have to say, my perception is that we're light years away from it.
Well, that leads me to kind of the finishing question, really. If you could speak to somebody else who's facing this with their sibling, what would you say?
I would say fight and make sure that you don't just get railroaded. You have rights, and your sibling has rights, and read whatever you can. But organisations like the Downs Association, MenCat, places like that have got so much advice and guidance. I think just hold on to your sibling or child or whatever's well-being, because if you don't push for it, nobody else will. And, you know, why should you have to accept a care home that's miles away? Why should you have to accept a care home that doesn't meet their needs? They are individuals who have as much right as the next person. And we need to remember that we shouldn't be doing things to them. We should be doing things for them. And standing your ground eventually results in kind of hopefully some change. But I think standing your ground and find out who the influencers are. You know, I'm on first name terms with the guy that heads up social care in the council area that my sister was in previously. I'm sure he loves getting an email from me. But to be fair, he's listened and that's been really appreciated, because I think sometimes, you know, we're afraid to go to the top of an organisation and we're being given the runaround by somebody further down, and there's this fudge layer of bureaucracy that we don't understand. So I guess that's the other thing. Understand the roots and who are the influencers, because it may well be that you're actually you're just being given the runaround because somebody doesn't understand, and that the people at the top don't necessarily know what issues are out there, and shout about getting the Down Syndrome Act guidance out, because you know that, I hope when it comes out we'll put some pathways in place and give some structure and have a document there that people can say, it says in here that, and that's largely what we're missing at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Jenny.
Thank you.
You embody that kind of that fight that you just mentioned about there and standing your ground with everything that you've said. And it sounds like you've been on an incredible journey and still on that journey with your sister. And it seems like there's almost a happy ending to a certain degree, that she's happy and comfortable. And I think that really speaks to the home, which I know we're going to try and speak to them at some point in the way that they're approaching the care and stuff like that. So thank you so much for your time and for sharing your story. That's really appreciated.
Okay, thank you.
So for anybody who's listened to this episode and would like more information, then do reach out to some of the organisations that Jenny's mentioned. Also like, comment and share it with anybody you think could benefit from the information that we've spoken about or would benefit from the story that Jenny's shared. But otherwise, thank you very much.